Mix, President of the Golden Valley League of Women Voters. On behalf of the Golden Valley League, I want to welcome you here in the audience and those at home, and of course, we welcome all the candidates who left a beautiful evening out in a summer day to come here. The League of Women Voters is a nonpartisan, volunteer organization of both men and women who believe a democracy is best served by informed voters. We do not support or oppose candidates or political parties because we want to hold a fair, impartial forum. This forum will give you the opportunity to learn about the candidates and ask questions about the issues that are important to you. And it's our goal to treat each candidate with fairness and courtesy. The views expressed by the candidates are theirs alone. As a bit of background, the 4th Judicial District serves all of Hennepin County and is the largest of the 10 Minnesota court districts. The 4th District handles nearly 800,000 cases each year with 62 judges, 12 referees, and 549 staff members. The judge's term of office is 6 years. None of the candidates for seat 43 or 61 are incumbents. The top 2 vote getters for each seat in the primary election, which is August 12th, will go on to the general election November 4th. To ensure impartiality, we asked Kay McCauley to be our moderator. Kay is a member of the Anoka-Blaine-Coon Rapids League of Women Voters, and she's not a resident of the 4th Judicial District. Thank you, Kay, for agreeing to moderate tonight's forum.
I'll give you just a little description of our format for tonight. There will be an opening question, which has been sent to the candidates prior to this. Then they will answer questions from the audience after that. If you could see up here, you will see we already have some. And so if you have questions that you would like to present to them, please write them on the little papers. Someone will pick them up for you, bring them up here, and then we will do as many questions as we possibly can during that part of the program. It's when you do write a question, please, questions for judicial candidates cannot ask for specifics on a particular case or cases that may come before them. That is not their job to respond to that kind of thing. So if you ask it, you won't hear me ask it. We may have to consolidate some questions. It's unlikely we can ask everything that happened. If that happens, then please ask the candidates after the meeting or contact them individually. We ask that there be no demonstrations like applause during it or booing during it. We really don't have a problem with that usually, but of support or opposition to the candidates or their positions during the forum. Because what we want to do is to give them every opportunity they can to be able to give their own ideas and opinions as responses to these questions and allow you to be able to hear their answers. So after the question and answer segment, there will be a 1-minute closing statement. And candidates, in any of your statements, we do have guidelines that none of the comments can be personal in nature that are directed to another candidate. Tonight we have a 2-part forum. The first are the candidates for seat 61 and then candidates for seat 43. At this time, I'd like to welcome the candidates for the 4th Judicial District for seat 61. I'm going to name them in alphabetical order. I will repeat their names often when I call on them, very purposely, because anybody who's watching this on cable TV and any of the repeat things, the idea is to get those names in their heads. So even though it's up here, I will say it. I want people to get that connected. So first on my right, Beverly Aho. Next, Stephen Antelock, Jean Brandel, and Amy Dawson. There is one other candidate, Mark Arneson, who is not here tonight. We're ready for the opening question, which you will have 1.5 minutes to respond. A league member at the table is the timer. She will show you a card when you're 15 seconds left and another when it's time to stop. When you see the stop sign, you may finish the sentence, but that's all. Everybody can see, okay, you know how that works. The opening question is, we'll give the question first. Why are you running for judge, and what are your qualifications? We drew numbers or names, identify them to start with for the first one, and we're going to go in alphabetical order after that. And Jean Brandel is going to be first, and then we'll go alphabetically after that. So Jean, you may begin with your response to that question.
Thank you. Minnesota courts exist to protect everyone, but going to court can be stressful and costly. If you must appear in court, you want a judge who understands and respects the law, who listens closely to all details of the case, who treats you with dignity, and who makes fair and equitable decisions. I will be that judge. I have 23 years of courtroom experience handling very serious, high-profile cases in civil, criminal, family, juvenile, and appellate courts. I have a balanced perspective on criminal law because I have worked as both a prosecutor and a defense attorney. I have won many jury trials because I work hard, develop strong relationships with my clients, and understand how to apply the relevant law. I have represented homeless people and millionaires and anyone in between. No matter what my client's ethnic, racial, economic, immigration, or health status, I treat them all equally and with dignity, and I will do the same for any person who appears before me as judge. Over the years as a trial attorney, I have earned the goodwill of judges, peers, and opposing counsels because I excel at fighting for my clients' rights while finding common ground and treating my opponents with respect. I will carry that same temperament into my courtroom as judge. I'm running for judge because I want to serve the people who live in our racially diverse urban suburban legal system. I was a government attorney for most of my career, and I want to return to public service. After 23 years as an advocate, I believe I possess the knowledge and skills needed to sit on the bench. I will absolutely follow the law, protect public safety, and will use available resources for treatment, education, if it is safe and appropriate to do so. Thank you.
Thank you. And the next responder is Amy Dawson.
This is the first time I've ever been last going alphabetically.
Well, you're not last, you're second.
Well, but after
Oh,
that,
out of these.
we're seated alphabetically.
Yes.
All right. My vision is to be a judge who is a champion for equal access to justice. For the last 9 years, my work has revolved around children and families affected by disabilities. Recently, I met with a dad who desperately wants to spend more time with his daughter. She has multiple disabilities and uses a wheelchair, and he told me how much they enjoy camping. And it struck me that this father can find an accessible campground, but he feels that he's never had equal access to justice. That's why I love the work that I'm doing. Every day, I am fighting for equal access to justice. My proudest achievement was winning equal access to health care for children who have autism. I fought the system and won. But sometimes I wonder, what if we'd had a different judge? Our judge had an open mind, he listened without bias, he studied the briefs, and he treated the case as though it were one of great importance. We need more judges who will hold the complexities of the law, individuals, families in our community. Each judge has the power to make justice accessible. And that's why I'm running for judge. I have experience with complex litigation, probate litigation, juvenile court, criminal justice, and family law. But it's my experience fighting for the little guy that qualifies me to be judge.
Thank you. Thank you. Beverly Aho.
Good evening and thank you. And thanks first to the League of Women Voters for hosting this forum and for all of you for being here tonight. I'm running for this position to serve you as an independent, experienced voice with no agenda or special interest. My interest is in applying the law, the rule of law, in a fair, impartial, and conscientious way. I have a passion for justice and a love for our Constitution, for our county and its residents. As a practicing civil litigation, business, and real estate attorney, I am in court and understand the complexities of advocating for clients to achieve significant results and the importance of judges' decisions at each stage in the process. I would like to contribute my skill set in business, legal, family, and life experience to serve as judge. In addition to my law degree, I have an MBA from the University of Minnesota, an undergraduate degree in chemistry and computational mathematics. I have more than 25 years of experience working for large and small companies in Hennepin County, and I co-founded a technology company here. I'm honored to be endorsed by our Sheriff, Rich Stanek, Congressman Eric Paulson, and retired Minnesota Supreme Court Justice James Gilbert, among others, and to have broad support across all demographics for this seat. My husband Brad and I have been residents of Hennepin County for more than 30 years, where we've raised our 3 now adult children, and we've actively volunteered in each of the 8 communities in which we've lived or worked in Hennepin County. I was raised with the principal values of hard work and compassion and community service. I will bring those values into the courtroom. I pledge to be a hardworking, ethical, and impartial judge and will treat all parties with dignity and respect. I'm Beverly Aho, and I respectfully ask for your vote on August 12th. Thank you.
Thank you. Steve Antelock.
Good evening. Thank you all for missing the Aquatennial Torchlight Parade for this wonderful event. I appreciate the opportunity to speak with you directly. I have been a courtroom lawyer for more than 30 years, my entire career. In law school, I worked in Ramsey County as a judicial clerk for judges in the courtrooms. After that, I joined the Hennepin County Attorney's Office, where I started out as a law clerk, became a staff attorney, and then finished about a 5-year stint there as an assistant Hennepin County attorney. After that, I went to private practice, and for the last 25 years, I've been trying cases. Cases in federal court, in state court, in 8 different states, all across the state, all kinds of cases. I love trial work. I enjoy that search for justice and that search for fairness that we do. It's one of the best jobs in the world because every day I go out there and try and find justice for my clients. As a result of that, the courtroom is practically like my living room. I feel that comfortable in it, knowing what has to happen, knowing how things have to work right for justice to happen. And we all have to work for that. It takes a team effort, and it takes a group of people working diligently to do that. Public service has prepared me to be a district court judge. Volunteering in the community has brought me closer to others in need and has helped to develop the capacity for compassion. Service showed me the importance of patience and humility and has fed a natural hunger for justice. I will bring those values as a judge to this bench.
Thank you. Now we're ready to go to the questions that have been given to us from the audience, which means they did not get to prepare specifically for these questions. And we do have a minute. I have the discretion to say, you can't possibly answer that in 1 minute. And I can extend the time if I choose to, but we'll try for a minute and see if it seems like an appropriate time for these questions. Right. And because we're going to be rotating, the first one will be started with Amy Dawson, and you will all have the same question. You will all have the same chance to answer it. First question. What do you perceive as the most critical issue facing the Minnesota District Court? What do you recommend to be done to address that issue? Amy.
Thank you for that question. I think that the most critical issue addressing the district court right now is access to justice. When courts are backlogged, when judges don't make decisions fairly and swiftly, when people have to wait a long time to get answers that they need right now, justice is not accessible. As a judge, I would strive to hold the complexities of the law, the individuals and communities, and champion equal access to justice. I think what we need to do is design a system where those who have the least access, those who are most marginalized in our society, have access to justice. If we can design a system where those people have access to justice, then it will benefit all of us by improving the system.
Thank you. Beverly Aho.
Thank you. Hennepin County has been nationally recognized as a leader in innovation. We've implemented problem-solving courts and specialty courts to address some of these needs. As Marta explained earlier, there's 800,000 cases that are filed in Hennepin County every year. There's only 62 judges, 12 referees, and 549 staff that take that on. It is a formidable task, and Hennepin County is, of course, the busiest court not only in Minnesota, but between Chicago and Seattle. These specialty courts have been set up and arranged to help monitor and help some of the pretrial, some of the post-trial issues, to help some of the treatments that you heard during open statements connect with some of these in different areas. They involve criminal mental health court, domestic violence court, drug court, DWI court, and veterans court. We also have gone now to an e-filing system, electronic filing, which has significantly helped. And I know when I file cases, and I do throughout all of Minnesota, the district courts that have the e-filing system in place has done remarkably well in helping to speed up those efficiencies. My time is up. Thank you.
Steve Antelock.
You know, I think the principal issue with the courts is one of money because they don't have the ability to fund themselves. I recall a day when you had clerks and court reporters and all kinds of staff to help manage the everyday things that happen in a court. We're down to, in a lot of places, having a choice between having a court reporter to record the proceedings or a clerk to help you out. And the result is that attorneys are doing more and more of this, and not that we mind having to work, but that takes time. And it takes a little bit more effort and a little more coordination. Hennepin County's done a great job. I myself have been a paperless attorney for about 8 years. So I've been using electronic filing and electronic methods in my own office, along with the business world for quite some time. And the courts are only now catching on. There are all kinds of collaborative tools we can be using. There are all kinds of virtual appearances, all kinds of video and other methods that we can use that can help kind of shrink down the costs and bring access to everyone within the system. There are things we can do. Hennepin County's doing a great job. I think we can do some more.
Jean Brandel.
Thank you. You know, I actually don't think the courts are doing very badly at all. I think e-filing is certainly helping. But I think as far as issues facing the courts, one of the biggest ones is that I'm a big believer that healthy families create strong, safe communities. And if you look at the district courts, they mostly handle real people and real problems, and families are touched by court in so many different ways, whether there's a criminal act that happens, whether it's domestic violence, whether it's PTSD of a veteran who's a family member, whether it's child abuse, drug addiction, mental health issues, disabilities, school rights, people who are, there are so many different ways that families are touched by the court system that I think it's really important for our court systems to be aware of the organic whole of a family when it's making decisions. And obviously, every judge has to follow the law and every judge has to keep people safe. And I would agree with Bev Aho, which is that where those other courts are fantastic, like Veterans Court and Drug Court and Mental Health Court, those should be utilized as much as possible where people are safe and it's appropriate.
Thank you. On to the next question. I will say that it's possible that we have some questions here that may be information that somebody would like your opinion on, and it actually could be something that you really can't do anything about. We'll try not to use that, but sometimes that happens. I mean, you have to follow the law. Whether you may have an opinion that disagrees with the law, but you still have to follow the law. So if you hear a question like that, just know that it's a possibility. All right, second question. And our first responder will be Beverly Aho. How much discretion should a judge have in following sentencing guidelines or applying alternative sentencing? What criteria would you use in making such decisions?
Thank you very much. Sentencing guidelines are typically established by our legislature that goes through and they'll set up regarding, depending upon what the issue is. And this would obviously be involving some type of criminal court, everything from traffic violations to major felonies. What is the work that's required of the judge is twofold. First, to make sure that the defendant in that case has access to a fair and responsible, reasonable trial, to apply the law fairly and equitably to that person, as well as to the victims from their standpoint as well. Once that's been determined, then sentencing, if it's applied for, as applied by the judge, has to fall within those guidelines. And it would be the judge's discretion to take all kinds of things into account, all the facts of the case, all the circumstances of the case, and applying those. So there's not one carte blanche general rule that you can give. It would have to be depending upon what the issue is, the circumstances of the case, and what has been established. Thank you.
Steve Antelock.
The whole point of the system is to be a system of justice. And so no matter what has to happen in that courtroom, the judge is obligated to see that justice is served for everybody involved. That includes victims, that includes perpetrators, the families of those groups of people, and the public at large. So the judge has an obligation to do what, in his or her best judgment, achieves that goal. Now, with sentencing guidelines, legislatively mandated, they're required, they've got to be imposed, and they limit the discretion the judge has. That's fine. I can act within that discretion. I think it's important for everyone to know that for felonies and some of the gross misdemeanors, there are access to probation officers who can do pre-sentencing studies. There are advocates in the attorneys, that we have a system so that the defense attorneys and the prosecutor both look at those same guidelines and look at those circumstances and advocate for the best that they can for their part of that trial. And so the judge's opportunity is to take from those arguments, to take from those systems of thought and those arguments, what is a system of justice and what is a just result. That's what I'll do.
Jean Brandel.
Thank you. The sentencing guidelines are quite strict, and the judges must follow them. The exception to that is when there's evidence presented that is so compelling and follows the rules that you can either go below or even sometimes above the sentencing guidelines. If I were judge and I were going to, facing an exception to a sentencing guideline or even a recommended sentence, what I would look at is, one, safety of the community. Two, are there expert opinions that have been presented to me by the attorneys indicating that there would be a successful result? I think throwing money at somebody who's not going to change, who's not amenable to treatment, is a waste of money, a waste of time, and there is no reason to make an exception in those cases. So you look at the history of the defendant, the resources available, safety to the community, the opinion of the victim, and the attorney's job when they come into my courtroom is to say, this is what we think you should do and this is why. And I look at the balance of the evidence presented by both sides, and then I would make a decision if an exception is warranted in that situation.
Amy Dawson.
So, the sentencing guidelines are very strict. Judges have the opportunity to depart when there are very compelling circumstances, but it is the job of the attorneys, and all criminal defendants do have a public defender or a criminal defense attorney. I suppose some of them are pro se, of course, but they have the opportunity to have a public defender. It is their job to explain to the court what the compelling circumstances are for a departure. A lot of my experience with criminal justice has to do with individuals who have disabilities. And so a lot of the work that I've done involves whether somebody has the capacity to understand right from wrong or the capacity to assist in their trial and in their defense. And some of the times that I've actually seen decisions that I would disagree with, and a Rule 20 evaluation come back and say that somebody has the capacity to do those things and be charged with a crime. But sometimes that can be a compelling circumstance. And also, we need to think about the victims.
The next question is one of those that may or may not be something that you actually have a lot of leeway in. So when you answer this, think about how you can answer it and still get some information to the person who asked this question. Because it asks, okay, what is your position on the continued incarceration of sex offenders after their initial sentence is served? As a judge, where do you fit into that picture, I think is what part of this would be about. And we'll start with Steve Antelock.
That's a really tough question. That's a really hard way to answer because you're getting at the very core of our constitutional requirements that no life or liberty be taken without due process of law. And so the question is what process is due? In part, I think we have to let the legislature work on this and develop it. That's really the role of the lawmakers to try and establish those circumstances. The judge's role is to determine whether or not those circumstances have been met. And I think it's particularly important that we protect victims in those circumstances, but we also have to protect those people who are incarcerated who've paid their debt to society, however we've decided that debt should be paid, and that if they be healed, that they be released. Now, that's really the question. And how do we determine that? I think that's what trials are for. I think that's what the circumstances that the legislature really has to deal with. But again, this is a system of justice, and we've got to be fair to everybody, the victims, the society as a whole, as well as those persons who are incarcerated.
Jean Brandel.
Thank you. That is a really tough question because I've represented people who are sex offenders, and I will say that there are some I've represented who should be locked up for the rest of their lives, and I was relieved that that's what happened because they are so, so dangerous. And then there are other people on the far side of that spectrum who have made, say, one mistake. And, you know, I will say this, most sex offenders were being perpetrated on. I think if you look at the studies, most of them were molested or abused in some way as a child. And unfortunately, it goes back to what I was talking about earlier, that cycle of violence, cycle of families being affected. But as a judge, I mean, right now there's a civil process, there's also a criminal process, and right now it's very hard for those people to get out. And I think that is good. I think there should be a standard against which somebody should have to get out as far as whether they're a danger to society. Now, there is also the issue that Steve mentioned, which is definitely that people shouldn't be locked up for the rest of their lives for one mistake. So there's no really good answer, and yet you have to follow the law on this, and it is up to the legislature. I will definitely agree with Steve on that.
Amy Dawson.
Sure. Well, first I'd point out, you know, I think we're as candidates for judge, we're not really allowed to answer this question and say exactly how we would rule. But obviously, it's a very difficult balancing test. The legislature has passed laws, and sometimes when the legislature passes laws, they conflict with constitutional guarantees of liberty and civil rights. And so this is one of those cases, I think, that has some of those balancing considerations that you have to think about. And it's a really tough one because some people, if they're guilty of the crimes that they've been accused of, I think a lot of us agree, for the safety of the community, we don't want those people on the streets. And we think that they'll re-offend, and something needs to be done to keep the rest of us safe. We probably need to find an answer that's not incarcerating people for life. We need more treatment for offenders so that in the long term, all of us can be safe.
Beverly Aho.
Thank you. I would agree with what my colleagues here have said as well. As judge, I will apply the rule of law in a fair and impartial manner. Part of that, and especially listening to these types of situations as you're describing, are very deep, deep issues. Fortunately, we have the opportunity to bring in experts on these issues and to take the full totality of the circumstances, the background, the treatment as has been described of what has gone through and undergone through the various programs that we have to come together with that. But again, the legislature sets these as a judge. Our job is to apply that law and to do so in a fair and just manner. As judge, I will do that. Thank you.
When I first gave the directions for the questions tonight, I said we can't address specifics or cases. I'm not sure if this is a little bit on that line, but if it is, I hope it seems to me it was appropriate that you were able to answer this without making it sound like a specific kind of case. So I appreciate that. We have so many questions up here. We're not going to get to all of them. We're going to do a good job. What is your response to the report that is out there that the 4th Judicial District judges are the most lenient on gun crimes? There has been a council member who cited this in light of the number of recent gun crimes. And yes, this is a specific kind of question, but I think it's all right. I think I'm struggling here. Just a bit. Okay, all right. Would you like me to read the question again?
You know, I was just going to ask, I'm a little confused on what the exact question is.
To you.
Thanks.
What is your response to a report that the 4th Judicial District judges are the most lenient on gun crimes? And that would be started by Jean Brandel.
I don't agree that they're too lenient on gun crimes, but I do think gun crimes do have to absolutely be prosecuted and have to be, we have to follow the law on gun crimes because it is a very serious problem in communities. I think the key is to make an across-the-board issue as far as gun crimes, to make sure that it's being applied fairly. And I don't know that, I've not seen that the fourth district is too lenient on gun crimes, but if it is, I think the best thing to do would be have some kind of council on it with all the counties and the legislature, and make sure that there's some kind of standard across the board that all counties have to follow. But I can tell you from my personal experience, I had a kid in a neighborhood who had a BB gun and was shooting squirrels one day because he wanted to collect the pelts to make a hat. And he actually had to face pretty serious consequences because it was a gun. So I think there's times for exceptions to those rules too, and that was actually in the 4th district. So I thought that was way too serious for a kid who just shot a rabbit, but that is what it is. So actually it was an air pellet gun, not even a BB gun.
Amy Dawson.
Thank you. You know, I think actually my first initial reaction is that our jails are overcrowded. And what I've heard of people say around town is that our judges are afraid to sentence people or put them in jail when there's no room, and that there's pushback from our jail system and our prison system in that regard. And I think that as a judge, you have to focus on what you can control, right? It's what all of our mothers have told us. You can only control your behavior. And if the judges are letting people off easily for whatever type of crime, then the system isn't going to change. Prison jail beds aren't going to grow. We aren't going to have that space unless the system responds to the verdicts of the judges. And so the judges should look at each case, obviously fairly and impartially assess the facts and use their judgment and apply the law, but they should be holding people responsible.
Beverly Aho.
Thank you. I believe that question is in reference to a Carol Levin show that was, they had a little newscast on this, and they showed a graphic that showed how Hennepin County judges were perhaps more lenient regarding gun crimes. Judge Kevin Burke actually responded to that, and he did quite well. And he said that you can't compare this, it wasn't an apples and apples comparison. And so, again, I don't have the facts or the actual analysis for that. I just saw it on the news. But I do believe that, as has been stated here, our legislature sets up what the sentencing guidelines are and how those gun crimes are to be adjudicated. And as judge, we apply that rule of law. Again, I'm very, very honored to have the endorsement of our Hennepin County 7-year sheriff, Rich Stanek, who has endorsed me for this position. And I would be honored to serve as judge, and if so, will apply those laws fairly and equitably. Thank you.
Steve Antelock.
You know, I'm not familiar with that particular study, and so I would want to ask a lot more questions about how that conclusion was reached. But, you know, I will say that I have a great deal of respect for the Hennepin County bench. I think it's one of the most solid benches that I've had the opportunity to try cases before. And so I'm a little skeptical that they're necessarily more lenient than elsewhere in the state. I've heard nothing that the judges act outside of the guidelines or are unreasonable in what they're doing. And what may be happening, I'm going to speculate a bit, is that in looking for some solutions, some societal solutions, that maybe we're looking at this as sort of a public health issue. And how do we change the culture so that we have fewer gun crimes, so we have fewer crimes, period. And so what may be happening is that shifting view of sort of treatment as opposed to simply punishment and racking up enough months in jail in order to punish somebody to stop them from using a gun. I think if we change the way we think about guns, if we change the way we think about those crimes, we can be effective. And that might be what's part of going on. That's speculation, though.
All right, the next one is an entirely different type of question. You all know when you get to the ballot box and the judges are there and it's, oh dear. I mean, as a voter, many of us think that. So many people say they do not vote for judges. They just leave that part blank because they don't know the issues that have to do with how do you pick a judge. So the question to you is, What would you tell the public about how to evaluate a judicial candidate?
Sure.
And Amy Dawson, you're first.
Sure. Well, so for people who don't know about it, you can actually go to the Secretary of State website and search for My Ballot. And that's a really great way to easily figure out exactly who you're going to vote for when you go to the polling place. And it includes the judicial candidates. And there's a link right there. So if you have internet access and can do this, you can follow the link right to each candidate's website and learn about them that way. I'd invite you to learn about me. I'd invite you to learn about me on my judicial campaign website and also my Facebook. But for me, especially most importantly, look at my work website, autismlawcenter.com. The work that I've been doing the last 10 years, I think speaks a lot about me and helps people know who I am. Also, I'd invite everyone, not just the people in the audience, but anyone who might be watching, to come to one of the events that I'm having in the community, or to just reach out and contact me. But I want you to get to know me.
Beverly Aho.
Thank you. Yes, my website as well is beverlyahoforjudge.com. All my contact information is there. I'd invite you all to reach out to me via email or phone call. My phone is there as well. There are 62 judges in Hennepin County. The vast majority have experience on the criminal side. But that's just one aspect of our judicial system. I come with business experience, an MBA, I believe the only MBA on the court, and also more than 25 years of working for large and small companies in Hennepin County, and also civil trial experience, real estate experience. I recently won a jury trial down in Blue Earth County, did closing arguments on a case that won almost $1 million for our client there, and recently represented property owners in Dakota County earlier this year that actually gained national attention in an eminent domain action. So I've had a broad breadth of experience, but I'd be able to fill in where we've had some of those judges that have had this business experience that have recently retired and be able to come in and serve in that capacity on the bench. I'd be honored to do so. Thank you.
Steve Antelope.
You know, we're really in a golden age of access to information, particularly for judicial races, because you've got Google and Ask.com and Yahoo.com and everything else. If you put our names in, you will find out all kinds of things about us. You'll find out what appeal cases I've handled. You'll find out probably what trials I did. Find out that I was a commissioner on the Three Rivers Park District and school boards. You'll see our public service. You'll see our record. And it's going to be reported by independent people. You can also go to our websites, and like everybody else, I've got one too, Antelope for Judge. You can find out what I say about myself. Those are particularly important ways to get information. I think the best way is to ask your friends and neighbors. Ask who they know, who they've heard about, who they want. I would like you to take a look at me and say, you know, would I like to have Steve Antelope as a neighbor? Is he someone that would fit into our neighborhood, would make me feel good about having him next to me? Somebody that I could talk to over the backyard fence? That's the kind of question, that's the kind of comfort level I think we ought to be having with our judges and our elected officials. The easy way to do that is on that web.
Jean Randall.
Thank you. I think when you're evaluating who to vote for judge, I would agree, definitely look at people's websites, and I'll throw in mine as well, brandleforjudge.com. But I think you want somebody who's measured, who has a history of not being a zealot, who's respected by both sides. I mean, you can be respected by your peers and hated by your opponents. I've had people write recommendation letters for me, and many of them were from the U.S. Attorney, county attorney's offices, and judges who were ex-prosecutors, because they respected me because I wasn't a zealot. I came at it with a reasonable approach. I fought hard for my clients, and I still fight hard for my clients. But I also am not unreasonable. I'm willing to find a middle ground, and I think that's important. You don't want a judge who's coming into it with such a strong opinion about something or such a strong attitude that they're not going to reach for middle ground on issues that they believe strongly in. So, and I agree. Look on the web. I mean, if you Google my name, you'll see articles about me, and you'll see things I've done, and you'll see that with all of us. So we are in a great age as far as information.
We just have a small amount of time before we go to the closing statement, and I'm actually going to play devil's advocate here just a little bit based on the last question. My hair is obviously not pretty color anymore. There's other people my age who don't have access to the web, who are not knowledgeable that way. There's a lot of younger people who also don't have access, who are not comfortable with using the web. So if that's, you have all of these things available on your websites, what does somebody do who doesn't have that readily available these days? Let's go back, and we're going to start with 30 seconds maximum.
Okay.
Beverly Aho.
Our libraries do give access to that, so I would encourage people to go to the library. You can have free access to computers. Other than that, I'd be happy to give my cell phone number out, access to telephone, 612-270-2828. I invite those calls and those questions. I appreciate the fact that people want to know who their judges are and are willing to do that diligence. Thank you very much.
Steve Antelock.
Oh, Bev beat me to the punch. The libraries are wonderful because you have free access to the internet there. You've got people that can help you find what you need. And they'll help you find it and leave you alone. And, I'm in the phone book too. Go ahead and give me a call. I've been serving on commissions and boards for a couple of years, so my name and number is out there. Find it, give me a call. I always respond to those calls.
Gene Brandel.
What she said, what he said, I think libraries are definitely what I was going to say. And I think also you can just ask neighbors and friends to print out materials for you if that would be helpful, or ask questions. If you can just get to the source, and you can make the phone calls and you can get information that's not necessarily online, but maybe printed out at your library.
Amy Dawson.
Sure. Fortunately, I am in the phone book. So if somebody doesn't have internet access and they can't get to a library, they can get a hold of me that way. As I mentioned earlier, I'm having events around the county and invite everyone to come to those. And so I'll give a plug for the next one. It's Tuesday, July 29th at 4720 Coffee Lane in Minneapolis. That's 55406. And I think it's going to be a really fun one. Hopefully it'll be a night like this so we can be outside. It's in my neighborhood, and so far we've had a really great response for people about to come.
All right, thank you. And we will now go to 1-minute closing statements. Everything you wanted to say tonight that you didn't have a chance, well, maybe not everything. This is your opportunity to think what the most important thing is that you can share with the people who are here tonight and who are watching on cable TV. And we are going to go in reverse order of the opening. So Steve Antelock is going to begin.
I have the experience, knowledge, integrity, and moral courage to make a good judge for Hennepin County. I believe in the importance of service to our community, and I volunteer for human rights commissions, planning commissions. I've served on school boards. I've served presently on the Three Rivers Park District Board of Commissioners. I believe that this public service has prepared me to be a district court judge, because volunteering in the community brings you closer to others in need, brings you closer to people who may not necessarily be like you. You develop a capacity for compassion, and service has taught me the importance of patience and humility as part of that. Part of serving on the boards, I also have learned to make my decisions publicly. As an attorney, we spend all our time about that attorney-client privilege where whatever your client tells you is completely secret. You get to make these decisions behind that curtain. When you serve on a public board, you have to make those decisions publicly. You have to talk about what your rationale is. You have to talk about what evidence you're citing. You hear the evidence, and you make a decision. That's what judges do. I've done that for years. I can do that for the Hennepin County. Thank you.
Beverly Aho.
Again, thank you and the other council, and for this opportunity to address you tonight. Who your judge is matters, because there's a likelihood that either you or a member of your family may be in court. As a second-generation American, I was instilled with the values of integrity, hard work, respect, compassion that judges need. I will apply that same strong work ethic I had throughout college and my profession to the courtroom. Life, work, and family experience, sweat and trials gives perspective, humility, and makes us appreciative of our country and our county. I'm passionate about serving as judge and believe my work ethic, skill set, and experience will enable me to be an asset. I'm honored to be endorsed by our Sheriff, Rich Stanek, and 3 former chairs of the Minnesota Judicial Selections Committee, George Soule, Ron Schutz, and Jim Gilbert. If elected, I will work diligently in whatever capacity the Chief Judge assigns and apply the rule of law fairly and impartially. Please visit my website, beverlyahoforjudge.com, to contact me. On August 12th, I respectfully ask for your vote. Please turn the ballot over and look for the shortest last name, Aho. Thank you.
Amy Dawson.
Thank you. Justice should be accessible to everyone. Too often, it isn't. When the courtrooms are backlogged, when judges fail to make decisions, when decisions are not made fairly and swiftly, then justice is not accessible. I'm running for judge because I want to make justice more accessible. I want to make sure that everyone has equal access to justice. I started practicing law in 1992 at the international law firm of Faegre and Benson. In 2009, I started the Autism Advocacy and Law Center. And since then, since before then, I've been focused on practice and advocacy and legal issues that affect individuals, children, and families affected by disabilities. I have experience with different types of litigation, complex civil matters, business litigation, probate litigation, trust and estates, criminal, juvenile justice, juvenile dependency, and family law matters. I am uniquely qualified to hit the ground running as a judge in any courtroom in Hennepin County. Thank you.
Jean Brandel.
Thank you. As an attorney, I've gotten to know people from virtually every walk of life. I have represented people from almost every country, it seems like, different people from different colors, people of different disabilities. And I've gotten to know these people personally, and I have always treated them with dignity and respect. One quick example is I was representing a person of color who did not want another white attorney. He just said, I don't trust you. I've been screwed over by the system so many times. I said, just wait. Let me represent you, and then you'll see. And at the end of it, we didn't win on that case. But he said, you know what? Thank you for treating me like a person, like my story mattered, and like I deserved my day in court. And I will give every person their day in court as a judge, because everyone deserves to be heard. Everyone deserves their full story to be told. And I have thousands of hours of experience in courtrooms. I will be the right judge for this position. I will be a perfect fit for Hennepin County with the diversity that is there. And I ask you to vote for me on August 12th.
Thank you. And this ends the first portion of this forum tonight, which is for the 4th Judicial District judges. And these folks are candidates for seat 61. We will take a 5-minute break for them to come down and the next group to come up, who are candidates for seat 43. I thank you very much for participating tonight. And now is a good time for applause. If people appreciate it.
Thank you for participating.
I'm Kay McCulley. I'm the moderator for tonight's forum. This is the second part of this evening forum for the 4th Judicial District for 2 different seats. This particular part of the forum is for candidates for seat 43 in the 4th Judicial District. Obviously, we have a big group, so we'll try to move this along just as quickly as we can. I will mention that we'll want to be sure that we adhere to the times. When it says your time is up, then it's time for you to stop. 15 seconds, you'll be warned. So on behalf of the Golden Valley League of Women Voters who is sponsoring this forum, I'm welcoming all of you for seat 43. I'm going to just quickly say your name as we go on. They're seated alphabetically. Daniel Craig, Mark Gincola, Brian Haggerty, Jason Hutchinson, Glenn Norton, Paul Scoggin, and Bridget Sullivan. These candidates have been given a question previously. They will have 1 1/2 minutes to respond. There is a timer who will give them the warning and tell them when it's time to stop. The opening question is, why are you running for judge and what are your qualifications? We have drawn to see who will begin, and Paul Scoggin will be our first responder.
Well, thank you and good evening, everyone. My name is Paul Scoggin, and for the last 30 years, I've been a trial attorney in the Hennepin County Attorney's Office. I've won a lot of cases. I've lost some too. And in the process, I have developed a profound respect for our jury trial system. And I've developed a profound respect for the critical role that rule of law plays in the health and welfare of our society. I'm running because I think that somebody who wants to be a presiding judge in the trial courts of Hennepin County ought to have tried a lot of cases in the courts of Hennepin County. I've done that, and I think that I can be a very good judge as a consequence. I also want to be a leader in the courtroom, just as I've had the opportunity to lead the criminal division of the county attorney's office under Mike Freeman and Amy Klobuchar. I also want to be at the forefront of upholding the rule of law, just as I've been fortunate enough to have the opportunity to do as a State Department representative in Kosovo, in Ramallah, and with the Royal Prosecution Service in Jordan. I want to serve my community as I have for 30 years as a prosecutor, everything from being a representative on the Whittier Alliance back in the 80s to the Falwell neighborhood groups here in Minneapolis now. I'm running because I understand what parties go through when they go in the courtroom, and it is fundamentally important to me that parties know that they were heard, that they were understood in the courtroom, and no matter what the outcome, they feel like they got their fair day in court. Thanks.
Bridget Sullivan is the next candidate. We have 1 1/2 minutes for these.
Good evening. I'm running for Hennepin County Court because I know it matters very much who the person is inside the black robes. I've appeared before great judges in many different courts, including the courts of Hennepin County. These judges were prepared, they listened, they wrote articulate and concise opinions, and it was very clear that these judges were very aware that the impact that their decisions had on everybody in the courtroom. After 20 years of litigation practice in various courtrooms, I want to make the same contribution to our legal system and to our community that those great judges have made. I also want to make improvements to our court system. The Minnesota Supreme Court Civil Justice Task Force made several recommendations about how we could improve our civil court system, namely, in particular, to reduce the very high cost of civil litigation. They passed some amendments to the civil rules that adopted those recommendations, but many of them were not implemented, but they could be implemented on an informal process, on an informal basis by judges, and I intend to do just that. I'm very qualified to be a judge. I've had over 20 years of very sophisticated litigation practice in commercial, fraud, intellectual property, and employment cases. For this, I've taken hundreds of depositions, and I've appeared in court countless times on procedural and substantive motions. I've also been at trial. I've done a lot of pro bono work in housing, in family, and immigration courts, and I've been also a guardian ad litem in family court. I've always been a contributing member to the Hennepin County Bar Association, the Minnesota State Bar Association, and I've also given many CLEs on civil procedure issues.
Daniel Craig.
Good evening, and I'd like to thank the League of Women Voters for hosting this event. The Hennepin County Court is what we call a court of general jurisdiction, which means it hears all cases. The judges on it have to be generalists, and the practice of law in modern times has become one of specialization, one in which a highly specialized attorney may have to spend years getting up to speed to understand how to try or understand various civil cases. I'm running because I've always been a generalist. That's a rare thing these days, but it is what's expected of our judges. There's been a lot of attrition on the Hennepin County bench. Governor Dayton has made 17 appointments, of which 12 have been former prosecutors or otherwise government attorneys. Attorneys that don't know what it's like to represent an individual, like the folks in our audience, who at some point more likely will either yourselves or know someone who is coming into contact with the Hennepin County District Court. And I think it's very important that a judge actually know what it's like to be an advocate for a real person, or an advocate for a business, and have the experience necessary to hear and decide a civil case. I've also been a contract prosecutor, so I've handled civil cases, I've handled criminal cases, and I'm the candidate with the greatest breadth of experience who can actually be ready on day one to fill a need that the Hennepin County bench has, because it needs judges with this type of experience. Thank you.
Thank you. Mark Jankola.
Thank you very much. Good evening, folks, and I want to thank the League of Women Voters for inviting us to speak to you tonight directly. I believe that I will make the best judge for this seat in Hennepin County. I have the broadest experience of anybody sitting up here at the front table. For over 20 years, I've been a litigator. I'm a nurse. I've taken care of people in times of crisis, crisis in the courtroom, crisis in a hospital. I've done everything there is to do, practically, in the field of law. I started out as a medical malpractice attorney, also did civil litigation for a long period of time. I've become a specialist in criminal law over the last several years. I've attained that designation with the Minnesota State Bar. I think my breadth of experience, my ability to listen to people, my ability to hear what's being said, to apply the law fairly, and be not an advocate, but to be someone who is going to make a decision based on what the parties are presenting to the court and do it fairly. That's what the court needs. That's what I'll do when I'm your judge. Thank you.
Brian Haggerty.
Thank you all for being here. I'm Brian Haggerty, and I'm running for Hennepin County District Judge because I'm committed to serving the public the best way I can. I've lived in Minneapolis for most of the last 20 years. And for most of the last 10 years, since I've been an attorney, I've been working for judges as a judicial clerk. A judicial clerk is basically a judge's right-hand man or woman. In sports terms, if a judge is a head coach, a judicial clerk is like an assistant coach. After 10 years as an assistant, I'm ready to move up. My legal experience has some real advantages when it comes to being a judge. First, because I've worked for judges, I have not worked for any of the offices that regularly appear before the court, such as the Public Defender's Office or the County Attorney's Office. Second, I've worked on a wide range of cases, both civil and criminal. Third, I've spent the last 10 years thinking about cases like a judge, not like an advocate. A judge's job is to find the right answer in each case, not to reach a particular result. I work hard to find right answers, which is why I graduated first in my class from law school. But it's also important that I have not always been a lawyer. I went to law school in my mid-30s after running a coffee shop in Minneapolis for 6 years. Because I haven't always been a lawyer, I'm very conscious of the needs of non-lawyers in the legal system. Finally, I've been sober for over 15 years, so I have some personal insight into some of the issues that arise in cases that come before the court. Equally important, the recovery process has put me in touch with people different from myself. As a Hennepin County District Judge, I'll deal with people from all walks of life. I'm well prepared for the job, and I'm eager to do it.
Thank you. Glenn Norton. No. Jason Hutchison.
Ready? All right. Hey, everybody. I'm Jason Hutchison, and I'm really glad to be here tonight. I appreciate the opportunity, like others have said, to talk to you directly. So, why am I running for District Court Judge? I'm running for District Court Judge because each and every one of you deserves to be heard, really heard, anytime you walk into a courtroom. Each and every one of you deserves to have the rule of law applied consistently and even-handedly in every case you're involved in, without regard to who you are, who your lawyer is, if you have a lawyer, shouldn't matter. I am running for district court judge because each and every one of you deserves, as taxpayers, to know that your tax dollars are being spent wisely by an efficient court that keeps it lean, light, and agile, and is capable of scaling up to meet the ever-expanding needs of the future while keeping an eye on the bottom line. I'm running for district court judge because each and every one of you deserves to have a judge who can balance these competing concerns, and that is not easy. So, what qualifies me? Well, I've been a prosecutor, I've been a defense attorney, I've been a city attorney, I've got civil law practice, I've represented businesses, people, agencies in just about every branch of the court. More importantly, for the last 2 years, I've been one of those 12 referees in Hennepin County, and I've handled thousands of cases in the Hennepin County District Court. That unique combination of experience, both in front and behind the bench, is what sets me apart. Thank you.
Thank you. And the seventh candidate, Glenn Norton.
Hi, I'm Glenn Norton. I'm running for seat 43 in Hennepin County District Court because I want to serve the public. I believe it's a certain duty as a citizen to step up and use your experience and understanding to do justice and to help your community. I have 3 themes: experience, understanding, and justice. I practiced law since 1986. I've represented both individuals, small businesses, and corporations in nearly 30 counties in Minnesota. My career includes working for small law firms, medium-sized law firms, and for myself. This system of solo practice informs my understanding of what it's like to be in court. I've been next to people as they're going through their worst day, and I know how to help. Understanding, having studied people, having 30 years of knowing what the court system is going to do, if you count my law school time, if you count my time before law school as a clerk in high school, maybe longer. But in any case, these are times when I learned what the power of court can do. The power of the court can affect families. As a family law attorney, I have had many different cases involving all sorts of practice. But the single theme in all of these cases is settlement.
And your time is up. Thank you. We're moving on to the questions that have come from the audience tonight. You will have 1 minute to answer these questions. The first one has to do with specialty courts. What is your opinion of the efficacy of the specialty courts in Hennepin County? And the real question is, please speak to whatever personal experience you may have that would have to do with those courts. And we'll start with Bridget Sullivan. With 7, by the way, with 7, I will be happy to repeat a question if you need to after we get partway through this. Bridget Sullivan.
Well, actually, the studies of the specialty courts, in particular the drug courts, that was performed by there was a task force that was set up to actually do a very, very robust study. I think it was commissioned by the Supreme Court of Minnesota, showed that the drug courts are actually, it's a mixed bag, but that they are generally very effective, that the recidivism rate of people who have gone through the drug courts is something like 38% less than people who have not gone through the drug courts. The people who have gone through the drug courts, their percentage of, there's a measure of how involved they are becoming the community by whether or not they have obtained housing, whether or not they have a car, driver's license, a job, et cetera. Those have shown marked improvements. Some of the other specialty courts, like the Veterans Court, it's probably too early to tell. My practice that I've been in volunteer work has been in the family courts, and what's unique about the family courts is that you have judges who are, you have some judges there who are committed to that.
Thank you.
Been
Your
there
time
for a
is
very
up.
long time.
Big question, short time. Daniel Craig, the same question.
Thank you. As a society, we imprison too many people, especially for nonviolent offenses, and I think the drug courts are a great way to both decrease recidivism and hopefully steer people out of the prison system. especially nonviolent drug offenders. And I think also the veterans courts, while the jury may still be out on their efficacy, I think it says something about us as a county that we're willing to focus on the men and women that have served our country and often have mental health issues that arise from that service, and we should focus on them when they end up in the criminal justice system. And so I'm a big advocate of specialty courts, and I think we should continue with them.
Mark Chidicola.
Thank you very much. The specialty courts are very important. They also do great things for people in Hennepin County. I've been involved in both the drug court, the DUI court, and most recently in mental health court with a young man who was arrested for a burglary but had severe mental health issues. When this was brought to the attention of the prosecuting attorney in that court, we dealt with it, and the young man was able to make repeated visits back to court for monitoring to make sure that he was doing things properly, maintaining his medication, seeing his providers, and doing everything that he needed to do to stay healthy and stay out of the system. With very little contact with the probation officer, he was able to maintain a lifestyle that kept him in the community. And I think this reduces the cost to all of us in society. These specialty courts are reducing costs for us and helping us to maintain a safe place to live for all of us.
Brian Haggerty.
So the question was what our opinion is of the efficacy of the specialty courts and relate that to our personal experience. So the first thing I would say, I didn't mention that before I went to law school, I went to public policy school. So my answer to this is informed by my understanding of public policy. And my answer is, I really shouldn't, my opinion of their efficacy is irrelevant. Their efficacy is a matter of fact. It's demonstrable or it's not demonstrable. So what my opinion is, we shouldn't be deciding things based on personal opinion about efficacy. So having said that, I haven't read any studies about their efficacy. So I would defer to research based on their efficacy. I would say that the theory behind them seems sound, as does the spirit moving them, which is a spirit of providing alternatives to incarceration. So the spirit behind them absolutely makes sense. Whether or not they work is a question of fact that should be determined based on quality research.
Jason Hutchison.
So when I was a prosecutor, I referred cases into the criminal and mental health court, DWI court, and veterans court. And I followed those cases through those courts. I was real happy with the results. It provided an opportunity to take some folks who made some bad decisions. Oftentimes their, let's call it misbehavior, was the result of something deep going on inside of them. And these particular courts have, I think, what it takes, or seemed like it to me, and again, this is anecdotal, had what it took to actually address those root causes, and I'm excited to see long-term what they do to reduce recidivism. I've had some experience with drug courts as well. Years and years ago, when I was a law clerk in Blue Earth County, I had a chance to go to Stearns County and see their drug court and work on a pilot project to implement a drug court into Blue Earth. I left Blue Earth County before that was finally accomplished, but it was interesting to watch that play out, and I was impressed with what I saw in Stearns County.
And Glenn Norton.
Thank you. Well, I'll talk to you about what I know the most about, and that's family court. Family court is the focus of my practice, has been for quite a bit of time. Family court uses some very interesting tools that save the client's money and they save the taxpayers' money and they bring us to justice. Family court uses what's called 114 rule neutrals. These neutrals are trained to help people sort out their cases. Family court uses early neutral evaluation. These neutrals, again, trained attorneys that attorneys will take advice from. So we're talking about the upper echelon of attorneys. These attorneys give the people, the litigants, a clue about what their case is from a neutral perspective. This brings the cases to settlement. This costs the clients less because it happens early in the case. This saves the taxpayer in great ways because the court just gets the answer as a settlement, and the people find justice from this.
Paul Scoggin.
For the last, almost 4 years now, I've had the good fortune of being the attorney that supervises 2 of the specialty courts in Hennepin County, the Veterans Court and the Mental Health Court. I also personally handle the Mental Health Court, including the case that one of my colleagues mentioned a moment ago. The point of the specialty courts is to link folks to services and to give them increased opportunities to get to the reason that they're in trouble with the court system in the first place, but balance that with increased accountability by making them come back to court and talk about where they are, and with much closer supervision by the Department of Court Services or the probation office. And let me just say this in mental health court, if I'm going to try to answer this in a minute, it is this. You see fellows who, in mental health court, who have not smiled for 10 years, and they are a mess when they come in. And 6 months later, when they finally linked up with the help and the services they need, you see for the first time in years, they smile. And that doesn't happen often in our court system.
Thank you. The next question is, given the extensive immigrant population in Minnesota, how do you believe your experiences would benefit you in the fair administration of justice while still remaining respectful of cultural diversity? Daniel Craig, you're first.
Thank you. A good deal of my practice has been dedicated to representing individuals of all backgrounds, of every race, ethnicity, economic status, immigration status. And so I have experience actually dealing with immigrants and helping them through the court system. A lot of that experience is done through civil rights work in cases in both state and federal court, attempting to enforce their constitutional rights. And my knowledge of the challenges that an advocate faces when representing an individual who is perhaps not at their best moment, and that's why they may be in the court system, or had a very bad experience in dealing with law enforcement, would inform my understanding of the case that the advocates are putting in front of me. Thank you.
Mark Jancola.
Could you just repeat the question for me, please?
Yes, I will. Given the extensive immigrant population in Minnesota, how do you believe your experiences would benefit you in the fair administration of justice while still remaining respectful of cultural diversity?
Thanks. Well, I can fall back on my nursing background a bit with this one. I worked in a hospital emergency room. I dealt with people who would come in at all times of the day and night with all kinds of problems. Many of them were people who didn't speak the language. Many of them were people of color, and we helped them out. I worked in the public defender's office for 8.5 years on a half-time contract. During that period of time, I handled approximately 680 cases per year on that half-time contract, and many of those folks were immigrants and folks of color. We always worked hard to make sure that they got fair representation. We utilized the resources that we had available to us to make sure that they were being heard, that their cases were being presented properly, and that they were being understood by the system. We worked very hard to make sure that they got their day in court. As a judge, I would make sure that they got their day in court, that they would have proper interpreters and the other folks necessary to make their cases to the court. Thank you.
Brian Haggerty.
Thank you. So the panel up here does not look like Hennepin County. If it's not clear, I'm a white guy, and we're 6 white guys and 1 white woman. So every one of us is going to have to probably, I mean, I could be wrong, but I think every one of us is going to have to step a little outside of our own experience in order to reach out and understand other cultures. I would say that I spent a portion of my early life after college living in Washington, D.C., where I worked at a shelter for runaway and homeless teenagers. We served an African-American population. I spent my time doing family counseling. I went directly into homes and worked with families. I was working with families who were very different from myself. So I think that that shows my values and is some relevant experience. I would also say that I have attempted, I'm in the process of translating my website into Spanish. My mother is a Spanish teacher. I speak French and German. I think it's important to reach out to other populations. I think the court does a great job. They have terrific translators, and it's very important.
Jason Haggerty. No, Jason.
Jason Hutchison.
Jason Hutchinson.
So when you say immigrant populations, I think my neighbors I think the people who appear in front of me every day who don't speak English as a first language, or even a second or third language. Sometimes they speak it as a fourth or fifth language. The court has a wonderful LEP, Limited English Proficiency Plan, and I don't know, I think my staff gets tired of hearing me beat the drum that it is important that anyone who steps foot in a courtroom really understands the words in intelligible language that are being said. I cannot stress that enough. It's a due process issue, it's a court issue, and the court does a pretty good job about that. I think I might also be one of the few folks up here, other than Ms. Aho, who comes from a family where I'm, at least on my mother's side, only the second generation to grow up speaking English. It's not that long ago that pretty much everyone in Minnesota, barring a few of our native population, were immigrants. So I think we can take a lot with that.
Glenn Norton.
Thank you. Our immigrant population is an important population, and it's a growing population. It's a population that votes, it's a population that pays taxes, it's a population that shows up in court. They need to be heard. They need to be heard clearly. They need to be listened to carefully. Diversity is an important issue when it comes to the rendering of justice, because one of the things that is the basic element of a good society, of a strong society, is a strong family. And families are definitely impacted by the court system in the rulings and in the results. And consequently, when we have the court system hearing these cases, we'll have a stronger society. I've spent time as a short-term missionary in Mongolia and a short-term missionary in Lima, Peru. I've gone firsthand to see these things, and it's really impressive. I don't want our court to ignore this important aspect. Thank you.
Paul Scoggin.
My older brother is a retired Minneapolis public school teacher. I think that he told me that in the Minneapolis public schools, there are about 47 different languages that are first languages for some of those kids. That experience informs me during the time that I was on the Racial Bias Task Force, Supreme Court's Racial Bias Task Force, and we developed the first translator certification system for the courts of the state of Minnesota. I've also had the really quite fortunate opportunity to practice law in countries that are remarkably different than this common law adversarial system that we had. Countries in which that are primarily Islam, or practice Islam, in the Albanian cultures, and in the assignments that I've had in the Middle East. All of those experiences in my life would very much inform how I deal and get at least a little glimpse into how different the worlds are that the people who appear in our courts come from.
Bridget Sullivan.
Well, I think the question presumes, and maybe I have this incorrect, that people who in immigrant populations and perhaps people who don't have white skin are a lot different than us. I don't think that's true. I've worked with people of color and people from Africa, people from Central America, and I found very many things about them that were similar to me. They all care about their families. They all want a safe home. They all want fairness. I've found people who I think are not like me, who are the same color. So I guess I'm objecting to the part of the question that that presupposes that people from different countries are different than us. Having said that, when I was a federal court clerk, one of the abiding concerns every time there was somebody from court who was a foreign speaker was we could not proceed unless we had a certified interpreter for that person. So I know that the very importance of having people of different languages have proper interpreters in court.
Okay, thank you. Next question. What do you see as the most critical issue facing the 4th Judicial District Court? What do you recommend be done to address that issue? And that would start with Mark Gincola.
Thank you. The most critical issue that I see with the court system is access. And access starts with volume. The 4th Judicial District Court has lots of volume. As you heard earlier, 800,000 cases per year. I think the specialty courts are a wonderful way to try and deal with some of that volume, to try and shunt some of that off. Also, the use of referees, like Mr. Hutchinson. Those kinds of referee positions are very important to try and get some of the volume away from the judges so that the judges can do what's necessary to try cases. Trying cases is one of the most important things a judge does. Trying cases is one of the most important things that happens to a person who comes into the courts. They have to feel that they're getting a fair trial, that they're being listened to, and that they're being treated fairly. And the use of the specialty courts and referees, I think, are a good way to do that, and Hennepin County's doing a good job of that.
Brian Haggerty.
So I think the most critical issue facing the courts, and this is the issue that voters have raised with me as I've spoken with them, dozens of different voters have raised this issue spontaneously when I ask them what they care about. It's racial disparities in the criminal justice system. Now, that's just one part of what the Hennepin County District Court does. A huge chunk of the docket is civil. So this is a narrow problem, but it's a big problem, and it's a problem that's of concern to voters and to me. Some of the causes of the problem are things judges can't do anything about. But there are some things I think judges can do to be sensitive to those disparities. And I think that probably the single most important thing for a judge to do is to be really independent of the parties who are coming before the court in a criminal case. So it's the judge's job to be the check on the prosecution, on the police, and to also evaluate the defense attorney's arguments carefully.
Thank you. And Jason Hutchinson.
Pro se litigants. That, I think, is the #1 challenge to the courts in terms of the amount of resources consumed and the increasing volume of court practice. We're increasingly a nation of do-it-yourselfers, and I can't be the only lawyer who spent some time thinking that I couldn't afford my own rate. I mean, lawyers are expensive. People are choosing to represent themselves for all sorts of reasons, and they have a right to in the system. The court really needs to, and the court does a really good job, and it's an increasingly good job over the last, say, 10, 15 years with the rise of the self-help center and things like that. But the court needs to continue to refine its efficiencies and make it possible for folks who choose to represent themselves to get a fair hearing. That's really tough to do. Now, one of the things I'm doing is I'm working on recalendaring how we do our business in the court system, when we schedule cases, which mass calendars we put at what time, to keep into mind that real people trying to get their kids on the bus in the middle of January might have an easier time getting to a 12:30 hearing than they would an 8:45.
And your time is up. Thank you. Glenn Norton.
Thank you. Most critical issue to the Hennepin County District Court, I think, is the cost of litigation, the cost of justice itself. It's expensive to people, it's expensive to the taxpayers, but yet it's one of the most important branches of our government. It keeps us civil. And so the cost of justice is escalated when we have big, long, expensive trials with many witnesses and many hours of legal work. The family court has found a solution. The family court uses settlement hearings. The family court uses neutrals. The family court uses the tools of mediation to settle cases for the cheapest price for the people, and it gets the court system unclogged with one of our busiest calendars. So I would say the most expensive is not the best.
Thank you. Paul Scoggin.
I think that I would probably return to the backlog or the crush of cases with the scarcity of resources that the 4th Judicial District has. It is the largest, it is the busiest system in the state. I've worked hard over the years to be part of the solution. One of the things that I'm most proud of, especially through my years as chief of the criminal division, was asking and essentially getting the judges to agree to block cases, to hold themselves accountable and not pass along a case to the next judge and not have to make the hard decision. That was not an easy thing for the district court to try to do, and there was significant resistance, but I will say that that has helped over the years move cases along. But Hennepin County still has the highest day of trial settlement rate in the state of Minnesota. It's really a glaring contrast. with the rest of the state of Minnesota, and I think there's much work to be done to have judges to be prepared to deal with cases before they get to trial, and to encourage an environment where the lawyers are ready to actually talk turkey before the day of trial.
Bridget Sullivan.
Well, I think the answer to this question depends on where you sit. If you're a civil litigant, you're going to be concerned about some of the things that Mr. Scoggin and Mr. Norton were concerned about. But I think if you're a criminal defendant and you're a person of color and you're facing the issue that Brian Haggerty talked about, the racial disparities in sentencing, you're talking not about the loss of some money or some alimony or something like that. You're talking about some real time incarcerated because of the color of your skin. And so even though we've had all kinds of task forces and all kinds of commissions on racial disparities in sentencing, it continues. I think it's a terrible stain on our judicial system. I know that some people that I've talked to have expressed concerns about the fact that there are a lot of prosecutors on the bench. That could be one reason. I'm not placing that on any particular, any particular judge, but I think we need more independent judges.
Thank you. Daniel Craig.
Thank you. The number one problem is resources, but this election is not going to solve that problem. That's an issue for the legislature. What this election can solve is it can put a judge on the bench who's ready to hear all types of cases on day one, someone with broad experience. As I mentioned earlier, Governor Dayton has made 17 appointments to the Hennepin County bench, and 12 of them have been former prosecutors or government attorneys. Not the kind of folks who would represent people like you, individuals and businesses in the civil cases that need more attention, that need to be decided earlier, correctly, and have the focus of the judge before you get to trial, instead of coming up on, say, a last-minute settlement on the day before trial because a judge was focused on a different type of case instead of on resolving civil cases, which deserve attention as well as criminal cases.
Okay. I realize that some of these questions actually go into areas that judges don't have a lot of control over. I'm well aware of that. So you've tried to see how that can work into what you're doing. So the next question, but these are questions that we have gotten from the audience. I want you to think again, as you have tried to do, what the actual judge can do about this, what has to do with this question. What steps could be taken to make the court system more user-friendly for non-lawyers and more understandable to jurors and witnesses? Brian Haggerty.
So that's a great question, and that's something that is very near and dear to my heart. One thing that judges need to do is they need to use ordinary language. And one of the things that I'm very proud that I did when I was clerking at federal court, I served on a committee that helped rewrite the local court's federal rules in plain English. And one example of something that we changed, and it was because of an interaction I had with a pro se, or a self-represented, to use a non-lawyer term, a self-represented prisoner who needed to submit a revised document, and the rules said it had to be redlined. And he wrote us a letter saying, I can't get a red pen in prison. Well, lawyers know red line means shows the changes, but he quite reasonably thought that meant in a red pen. So we changed that. We got rid of that. So I think that's crucial. And similarly, I think jury instructions have got to be written in plain, ordinary language. I've been amazed at the level to which lawyers don't pay much attention to jury instructions. That's left to the judge. So that's what I care about.
Jason Hutchison.
Judges can do a lot about this. First of all, judges can continue to, I think for most of the judges in Hennepin County, but definitely show respect to pro se litigants. I know there's a sort of an unspoken rule that they are the cases that nobody wants to get. And that attitude is changing, but it can change more. They're a reality to be accommodated. people exercising their rights. But what the courts have been doing and should continue to do is work with the self-help centers to work with projects to bring in volunteer lawyers like we do in the Housing Court Project, where we provide office space for VLN, Volunteer Lawyers Network, legal aid, and liaise with folks down at the self-help center who are also bringing in volunteer lawyers. I think that it's better oftentimes for folks to be represented or at least have the access to attorneys to help them out with their pleadings and things like that. And the court has a wonderful ability to provide space for that to happen and to encourage people to use those resources already in the building.
Glenn Norton.
Thank you. I think one of the things that the court already is doing that is very good to make user-friendly system is mediation. We have Rule 114 neutrals that I spoke about earlier. We have a large number of attorneys that volunteer in Volunteer Lawyer Network. We have legal aid attorneys that can give people advice. But then when the people know, when they're empowered with knowledge, then they can go mediate their case, strike a deal, buy into the deal with the other person, and have an agreement that results in justice. And so as a result, you don't have much time in the courtroom. This will really save our system a lot of money.
Paul Scoggin.
You know, our legal system is based on this kind of crazy patchwork of 1,000 years of traditions that have kind of built up into a system that is very difficult for those that aren't trained in the law to understand. In the last debate, people talked about Googling to find out about the backgrounds of various candidates. One of the things that you'd find if you Googled my name is an article written by Paul Anderson, who is a now retired Supreme Court Justice, who was the chair of the Supreme Court Rules Committee that I served on for 10 years. And the article is called A Plain Spoken Legacy. And what he's talking about in that article is a project that 3 colleagues on the committee and I conducted or engaged in 2007 and 2008 to completely rewrite the Minnesota Rules of Criminal Procedure in plain, everyday language. We did not succeed, but we came darn close, or at least a lot closer than we were, in trying to make the system readable by people who weren't educated in that 1,000 years of complicated patchwork, and to make it at least partially usable for pro se litigants.
Bridget Sullivan.
I think the statistic is that about 40% of the cases are the parties in Hennepin County are not represented, so they're what we call pro se attorneys. And I think there's two groups: the people who could actually work with the self-help center, and the self-help center is staffed by lawyers, and there's also places in there, as Jason said, for volunteer lawyers to work with them. And then there's a whole set of other cases where people really should have lawyers. And what we need to do in that arena is we need to expand the number of lawyers who are volunteering through Call for Justice, for Legal Aid Society, and the Volunteer Lawyers Network. One thing that Kathleen Blatz did when she was the Supreme Court Justice was she used her bully pulpit. She was outraged that there were so few people, lawyers that were volunteering in family court and in the guardian ad litem, that she sent us all an email or a letter demanding that we volunteer, and I volunteered for that. And I think that's one thing that judges can do is persuade more lawyers to volunteer.
Daniel Craig.
The rule of law creates a whole host of complexities that I don't think can be solved by rewriting court rules in plain language. The fact is there's a reason we have lawyers, there's a reason we need lawyers, and the problem of pro se litigants, I think it's really incumbent on the bar to solve. I'm a volunteer attorney with the Federal Bar Association's Pro Se Project, which is a project where essentially the court will refer cases to volunteer attorneys that are filed by someone without representation or pro se. Attorneys can either just meet and consult with the client, or they can end up taking the case on a pro bono basis. Last fall, I tried a pro bono case through the Federal Bar Association to verdict in federal court. If I were elected to the bench here, I would approach the Minnesota State Bar Association about starting a similar program, a pro se project for the Hennepin County District Court, where pro se litigants in that class of cases where there really should be an attorney can be referred to a volunteer attorney, much like the Federal Bar Association Pro Se Project. Thank you.
Mark Jankola.
Thank you. So the question was, what can judges do with pro se litigants? Imagine yourself a pro se litigant coming to court. What can the judge do? Everybody's talked a little bit about what the system can do, but what can the judge do? Well, what the judge can do is listen to the people. I've been fortunate to watch a judge, my father, over the last 14 years he's been retired, but prior to that, he was a judge on the bench in Anoka County. I've been fortunate to be able to watch the way he handled things, and I think he did it really well. I think it was a great experience to watch him listen to people, to communicate with people, to connect with people who were not represented by lawyers. And he always had a good luck, sir, at the end of just about everything he did in court. But he connected with people and he listened. He took the time. That's one thing that this system doesn't really have. That's what we have to figure out how to solve, is how to give people the time that they're entitled to in court. And that goes back to the backlog of cases. Thank you.
If I said to you, what is the broken window theory, would you know what I'm talking about?
Yes?
Because I can't ask the question if you don't.
I'm not familiar.
Okay. This is what I'm going to do, because this is a question from the audience. Let's see. Jason, did you said you knew what it meant?
I do.
So, and you are the first one to respond to this one. So you can start with that. Do you subscribe to the broken window theory, and why?
Well, I think actually I'm going to cite Mr. Haggerty here. I think that theories are things that you might hold in your head and say, sounds good, but at the end of the day, you need to look at data. Short version, broken window theory, New York, 1980s, place is a dump, so the story goes. And the crime was out of control, and they decided if we start with the small things, the things we can control, the things like the broken windows, and we hold people accountable for those, and we keep moving up the ladder, we generate sort of a system of accountability. There certainly was a decrease in crime in New York when they started applying the broken window theory. Obviously, others, I think Malcolm Gladwell famously, have challenged whether the broken window theory was actually the cause of the reduction in crime or whether it was more related to other things, and that's always the danger when you're trying to figure out correlation versus causality. I think that there are parts of it that sound intuitive. I know we generally all try to teach children sort of that. If you keep well, I'm out of time, so go ahead and see if other people can develop
See
a
if you
theory.
can find a way to see how this would possibly fit into your role. Thank you. Your role as a judge. See whether this has anything to do with a position as a judge or if this is coming from someplace else. Glenn Norton?
Well, I'm not familiar with the broken window theory, but I think one of the things that, judging from what my colleague has just described as the broken window theory, that we can do from the bench is to help people be in a position to have a change of heart, not just do something different today, but have a change of heart so that they do the right thing because it's the right thing to do. And I think that can happen if we give them an opportunity, we give them the respect, we give them our listening, careful listening to what they're saying, and maybe a little guidance. So being at a loss with the broken window theory, I guess I can't tell you exactly how I would apply it or what I would use it in court, but I think a change of heart is the bottom line.
Paul Scoggin?
A guy named James Q. Wilson wrote an article in the Atlantic magazine, I think in 1984, that was the birth of the broken windows theory. The notion being exactly as one of my colleagues said, if you take care of the little things, the big things will follow. There's been a lot of criticism back and forth, and obviously you can't all subscribe to one religion in criminal justice. But it was the birth of community police efforts, and ultimately a lot of the efforts in the criminal courts especially, to try to problem solve, rather than just the traditional, you did something bad, I'm going to punish you model. And we talked earlier about the specialty courts and 100 other initiatives that the courts in the last generation have taken on. They really are this birth of, let's stop looking at it the same way all the time, the traditional way. And A lot of that is going to be the purview of the executive branch of government, police, the prosecutors, and things like that. But to the degree that the court has reacted with, we need to solve the problem rather than just exacting the punishment, it's a good idea.
Okay. Bridget Sullivan.
Yeah, I think I agree with Paul. I think to the extent that this is a public policy question about to what extent we're going to punish small violators, people who are committing crimes of vandalism, because those people may grow up to become hardened criminals, that's really a public policy question that a judge shouldn't be making those decisions from the bench. However, to the extent that the judge is seeing that the perpetrator as a person who has a potential, and that's not reflective of who that person is, the judge can take that into account in deciding what punishment is appropriate.
Daniel Craig.
I think as a former city attorney and city prosecutor, I know that from the city council perspective, small crimes matter, especially cumulatively. And as a misdemeanor prosecutor, there were times when judges viewed property crimes and things like that as fairly low priority, things that should be resolved very quickly without much of a penalty. And I always disagreed with that, because if you're trying to improve a community, I agree with that city council perspective where small crimes matter too. And as a judge, I would not be dismissive of property crimes.
Mark Cincola.
Thank you very much. What I hear, and I'm not familiar with the broken window theory other than what I've heard so far tonight, it sounds to me like it gets towards the $1 million child theory. And where this would be most applicable would be in the juvenile court, where we're dealing with a kid who's starting out, and if we take care of the little things while he's little, they won't become big things when he's big. And I don't know if you've heard that reference, the $1 million child, but we expect a kid who's gone bad, who isn't treated properly at the lower levels, to cost society about $1 million by the time they get to be adults in prison. We want to avoid that. So to some degree, I think the broken window theory might be applicable at a certain stage, and a judge might be able to do something about that in the right circumstance. I don't know that it's good in adult court. The little things, I don't know that you're going to make that kind of a change. If a family hasn't been able to take responsibility in the way a person's reacting as they become adults, I think stronger measures need to be taken. Thanks.
Brian Haggerty.
So my colleagues, particularly Paul and Jason, have done a great job explaining the broken windows theory. As Paul said, it is primarily a theory that relates to law enforcement. What should the police do? What kinds of crimes should they go after in New York? Go after the squeegee guys, for example. Go after turnstile jumpers. And what does that do to reduce crime and improve public safety? That's an empirical question, and it's a debated empirical question, as Jason said. I think that the underlying idea, though, can go two directions. One direction is the one that Paul mentioned, where it goes in the direction of problem-solving courts. So and to the extent that problem-solving courts have derived from that theory, again, whether they work is an empirical question, but they seem like a good idea, and they seem like they work. But a different direction that the broken windows theory can go is, for example, stop and frisk, suspicionless stop and frisk in New York. And to the extent that the broken windows theory leads to things like suspicionless stop and frisk, I think it's a problem, and I think a judge's job is, again, to be independent from law enforcement and prosecution and to be a check on them.
I'm going to try to squeeze in one more question, but you only get 30 seconds for it because that's all the time we have. How would you take, and this is specifically something that judges do, how would you take into account impact statements that are used? Glenn Norton.
I assume you're talking about the victim impact statements?
Yes.
The victim impact statement is used in a sentencing context in a criminal case. And I would think, but I haven't experienced it as a judge, that you'd have to measure, compare, and consider, and sentence accordingly.
Paul Scoggin.
You know, as a judge, you see a lot of cases go in front of you, sometimes a dozen or more in a single day that you're making decisions on. One of the great things about community impact statements or victim impact statements is being able to find those cases that, although they sound low level and sound like they're not particularly significant, have in fact had a huge impact on a neighborhood, on a community, or on a particular person. And it allows a judge to kind of separate out, or at least be one measure that a judge can use to separate out those cases that he or she may have to take special care and concern in looking at.
Bridget Sullivan.
I think they're vital and they're critical to the judge's evaluation of what to do and how to apply the sentencing. But they are just one part of what the judge must consider. He must consider what's in the sentencing guidelines. So while they must be heard, and I think it's cathartic for the victim to have their statement heard, it's just one piece of the mix. It can't be the overwhelming criteria that the judge looks at when sentencing.
Daniel Craig.
I believe that sentencing should be done really on an individual basis, and I share some of the skepticism that one of our former federal judges, James Rosenbaum, has of the sentencing guideline system, and I think judicial discretion in sentencing is actually a good thing. And victim impact statements can be one part of the discretion that a judge brings to bear in determining a sentence based on the conduct of the individual offender, the circumstances of the individual offender, and the victim impact statement.
Mark Jankola.
It was the question how we'd apply the victim impact statement.
How would a judge take into account the victim impact statement?
Well, I think it's required that the judge take into account the victim impact statement. If one's been written, that's got to be presented, and it's got to be presented in open court. The prosecutor many times is asked to read a victim impact statement if the victim themselves doesn't want to give the statement. I think it's very important for an offender to hear a victim impact statement, and I think that has a great effect on behavior in the future. If people know how their behavior is affecting other people, many times it does have an important effect, and I think it's important for the judge to point out that that's going to be heard.
Brian Haggerty.
So I've read victim impact statements and discussed them with judges in talking to the judges I've worked for about how a particular defendant should be sentenced by the judge. And as more or less everyone else here has said, they are in the mix. They're part of what the judge needs to consider, and they're an important factor, and I would treat them as an important factor in the sentencing decision.
Thank you. That's all the time we have for questions that are from the audience.
So I don't get to answer? I know I'm a big talker, but do we have time?
My most embarrassing moments in doing this is that. Yes. Jason Hutchison.
Gently, I don't mean to criticize. So.
You're not criticizing. You're keeping me on my toes.
So I think Mr. Jankola and Mr. Scoggin really hit the nail on the head on how they're used by judges. But I do think that they serve an important function in that they are a nice, gentle reminder to judges that it's not just the two people, the prosecution and the defense, who are in the courtroom who are affected by the decisions of the court. And I think they increase transparency and accountability and remind the judiciary that it is a position of public trust, and it's a three-legged stool. I mean, yes, there's the state, there's the defendant, but there are others involved. Thank you.
Now we're done with the questions and the responses, and we have time now for a 1-minute closing statement of what you haven't been able to say at some point during this forum tonight. And we are going to go in reverse order, and so we will start with Glenn Norton.
Thank you. I have said earlier, experience, understanding, and justice. I've explained my experience. I've explained how it's brought me understanding and a sense of justice that will help me serve the community as a judge. I've taken the time to understand people. I've taken the time to study them and to respectfully consider their issues. Listen first, then act. This is what I want to do as a judge. This is how it also will reduce the cost of litigation to the litigants and the load to the system. Because first, I want people to go out and try and settle their issues amongst themselves with the court as the backstop. Then come to court. Of course, it's different with criminal law. There I would have to have some different rules, but they're there. We use them now. Do justice, love mercy, be humble. That's my philosophy. I'm Glenn Norton.
Thank you. Jason Hutchison.
So it's been great being here, and I really appreciate listening to your questions and having a chance to think about them. And obviously, I think we've all managed to get some answers out there pretty well, and others not so well. But I think it's an important conversation that we started here today, and I really hope you reach out to me afterwards, have a chat, check out the website, and just generally get involved and make an informed decision when you go to the polls on the 12th. It's important to remember that justice happens at the crossroads of individual people and a process. And it's a difficult balance to make work. And I think it's really important that you find a way not only to let every individual have their say, but to make sure that all the individuals have their say. And that's really the trick of being, I think, in my opinion, a judge as a manager of the system of justice. You're in charge of that courtroom, you're in charge of your caseload, you're in charge of your calendar, and you have to make sure that everyone gets heard fairly and timely. Thank you.
Thank you. Brian Haggerty.
Thank you. First, let me thank the League of Women Voters for arranging this event and all of you for attending. This is an exciting year for judicial elections. I'm proud to be part of a legal community in which so many lawyers are interested in becoming a Hennepin County trial judge. A trial judge's job is not glamorous, particularly in a court as busy as the Hennepin County District Court, but I'm eager to do the job. A good trial judge must combine legal skill with common sense and must bring his or her life experience to every case. My experience before law school, which includes running my own business, as well as working with runaway and homeless teenagers, will make me a valuable addition to the bench. A good trial judge must also stay entirely impartial. This will be easy for me because I've spent my legal career working for judges. I haven't taken sides as a lawyer, and I won't take sides as a judge. Please join Representative Susan Allen, Senator Ann Rest, Councilmember Andrew Johnson, and many others in supporting me for Hennepin County District Judge. Thanks.
Mark Gincola.
Thank you. First of all, I'd encourage you all to take a look at the website that I posted, giancolalaw.com. It is my business website, but you will see there all of the experience I've had over the years. I've been dealing with people in crisis. I read an article in the Minnesota Lawyer not too long ago written by somebody who deals with judges all the time, and a judge's job really is dealing with people in crisis almost every single day. I've been doing that since the early 1980s. I've been doing it exclusively in the courts for the last 20 years. I've dealt with people in some of the most trying times of their lives and helped them through it. I have lots and lots of experience in the community. I've done lots and lots of things out there with park boards and businesses, mock trial, students, been an ethics investigator, and as I said, I'm a criminal trial specialist. Please take a look at my Facebook page as well. There's a lot of good stuff on there and a lot of good stuff on my website, and I'd ask you to vote for me on August 12th. Thank you.
Daniel Craig.
Thank you. I'd also like to thank the League of Women Voters for hosting this event. Our justice system is exceedingly important. The Hennepin County court system is exceedingly important to all the residents of Hennepin County, and it requires judges who are extremely dedicated, who are smart, who understand the law, who have the experience in every substantive area of the law and in representing people in various backgrounds. People, businesses, attorneys who have clients and have been generalists can be ready to be a judge on day one. And that's why I'm asking you to vote for me, because I have that broad experience that I think will allow me to hit the ground running. And I'd ask that you please join former Dakota County Attorney John Sonstang, former tax court judge Gene Steppen, former State Bar President Patrick Kelly, and former Minnesota Viking and Super Bowl champion Matt Burke, who has also endorsed me, and vote for me on August 12th in the primary. Thank you.
Bridget Sullivan.
I think most of the candidates here tonight, both the people on this panel and the earlier one, are experienced trial lawyers who intend to be fair and impartial if they're elected to the court. But we all know that judges disagree. They disagree on the interpretation of the law, and they disagree on the interpretation of the facts. I think our current U.S. Supreme Court is all the evidence you need to know about of that fact, that very smart, very committed, very experienced judges often disagree vehemently. So what's clear is that judges, they're not legal computers. You can't put in the data to 10 judges and have the same predictable outcome. And we don't want them to. We expect judges to use the discretion that the law provides for them to use. We want them to take into account equitable concerns so that unexpectedly harsh results that would occur if we apply the rules mechanically won't apply. So what I ask voters to consider when they vote, when they consider who they are going to vote for judge on August 12th, is how we will use our judicial discretion. For myself, I can point to the fact that I've represented both plaintiffs and defendants in all range of cases, and I've also done a lot of volunteer work.
Your time is up. Thank you. Paul Scoggin.
Let me thank all of you here tonight for sitting through almost 2 hours of us yammering away. And I think I speak on behalf of all of us how much we really appreciate you taking the time to be here tonight. I got into this race because I think experience matters. I have handled thousands of felonies over the course of the last 30 years, from heartbreaking homicides to over $1 million embezzlement cases. I think that that matters, and that litigants coming into a courtroom want to see a judge who knows how the courtroom works, who knows what the rules are, both written and unwritten. I would encourage all of you to have a look at my website, scogginforjudge.com, and get a bigger picture of my biography, the things that I've been able to do in life, including the notion of some of the international service that I have as well. You'll see endorsements from the sheriff, from the county attorney, from the former county attorney, from the former United States attorneys, former Supreme Court justices, and on and on. I hope you'll consider me on August the 12th, and please remember to vote. Thank you.
And as moderator of this forum, thank you to the candidates for participating in this, for the audience who was here, all the people out on cable TV land who are watching and will be watching this. And before we take time to give them a round of applause, we have a word from Gloria Erickson of the Golden Valley League of Women Voters.
On behalf of the League of Women Voters of Golden Valley, I would like to thank our candidates for being here tonight. We hope this forum has helped the audience here and at home to make an informed decision. I would especially like to thank Kay McCauley for taking time from her very busy schedule to be our moderator. I would like to also thank Northwest Community Television for making it possible to view this event at home. The replay dates are as follows: Saturday, July 26th at 1 p.m., Sunday, July 27th at 7 a.m., Tuesday, July 29th at 7 p.m., and Sunday, August 3rd at 7 p.m. If you are interested in learning more about League of Women Voters, there are brochures on the table out in the hall. League members will be happy to discuss League activities with you. We would love to have you join us. Before we have a round of applause for all of our candidates, please remember to vote August 12th.
It was a pleasure to meet you.